great that you're all here today. Unfortunately, for those who were hoping to live stream the class who wouldn't be here today, the facility where the stream is actually encoded has a power outage. So even though we can record the lecture in here today, it can't be live streamed this morning out to everybody else. So glad you're here. You're going to see everything live. I sent an email to everybody else saying, or to everybody basically, saying the live stream's not working today. We're hoping that it'll be back up this afternoon. The archive of this class will be edited and put online in the usual schedule, a couple of days. Well, we're hoping anyway, because the editing facility is also in the building without power right now. So we should have an archive version of this up. So if you know anybody who was, not here today and said, I wanted to stream, what happened? They should check their email and also assure them that they can see the lecture archive. Okay? So it's going to impact a little bit about what we talk about today, just because I was hoping to look at our first assignment, but I'll kick that off till next Tuesday, just so that everyone's going to have a chance to hear about it at the same time, because that's it. Anyone here today who didn't come last class on Tuesday, who is registered but didn't come last class? Okay, so everybody got a syllabus, everybody filled in the EATV release form. Did I get yours back? If you didn't give one back to me because you forgot, it'd be a great time to give me that. Or I can give you the paper again. We're good? Okay. So lecture time today. In general, every week we cover a chapter that's in the textbook. And I got an email with a heads up from a student saying, hey, I checked in the library and the textbook is actually there in electronic form. Now, I'm not sure whether everybody in the class could check out that electronic copy of the textbook all at the same time. I would be surprised. But I'm going to check that out with the librarian. I'll give him a call today and see what the story is on that. So I did mention that there are actual physical copies of the textbook on reserve in the library, the Rosenberg Library, which is sort of that away on campus. So you could read it that way, or you can buy or rent the textbook, either from the bookstore or elsewhere, and possibly we'll see about this electronic copy that you can check out at the library that way. So again, I'd be surprised if everybody in the room could check it out all at once, but I did get that message from a student, so I want to follow it up today. So it's important to get the textbook. I see Chow's got her copy. They are there. Thank you, Chow. You're my go-to for showing off copies of the book. So, it'll definitely help you learn what we've got to learn if you're reading the chapters. And so, basically, I could write every week, homework, read the chapter. I'll just say it now. So, as soon as you get a hold of the textbook, follow along with our schedule. We're in week 1 this week, so read chapter 1. If you don't have the textbook yet, read it as soon as you get it. And the lecture slides that I have up here are a really good, thing to get you through while you're waiting for the textbook. It doesn't explain too much, but it has, all the content that's in the chapter of the textbook. So we'll be looking through these in class, these PowerPoint slides, and they have all the content. They just don't explain it much. So now it's too much content for me to talk about every class, and that would be really boring too. So there's stuff in the textbook that I may never actually say here in class, but you're responsible for reading the textbook and at least being aware of what's said in there. When it comes time to testing and quizzes and exams and stuff, I review with you exactly the issues that will be on the quizzes and exams. And the stuff that I talk about in class is always oriented to what's on the exams. However, you'll find information in the textbook that, again, I won't really talk about it too much in the class. It's very useful for you to read it at least once. So do read the chapters. You're sort of responsible for what's in them. We'll talk about reduced amount of topics in the time that we have in class. And then when it comes to quizzes and exams, we will review and focus in on exactly what kind of questions and stuff you need to study. Okay, is that clear? Any questions about that? So, as you're looking ahead, we're doing chapter 1 in the first week of the class. We'll do chapter 2 next week. So, get the book as soon as you can to keep reading. And if you have an hour to run to the library at some point, you can check it out there and easily read the chapter within an hour. Skim it, be aware of what's in it. I don't think you need to take notes on what you're reading there. What's up here on the PowerPoints will serve as notes for you. Okay, good. So we don't want to labor that, but that's basically what I'm assuming that you'll do every week is do the reading. And then, we have a series of assignments, and the first one's coming up for September 6th. So I did intend to talk about it today. Because of the streaming problem, I'll put that off till Tuesday. But if you want to just take a look at it, go right ahead. The Media Use Diaries, remember, it's a short 2 to 3 page little essay where the first part of it is to pay attention to what media you are consuming during the week, and kind of write a list. It's like today, Monday, when I woke up, I listened to a half hour of the radio, and then I walked to school and I listened to a half hour of music on my portable device or something. So if you could just get, I ask you to do that over a couple of day period. So you choose exactly when you want to do that. But if you're thinking about it already, that'd be great. So half the assignment is just, make a list as accurate as you can about your media usage. And we're, of course, in this class interested in stuff that is like radio and television and websites and stuff. We're not interested in something like one-to-one communication like emails, but anything that resembles like a kind of a one-to-many dynamic, like there's a radio show that you listen to and 1,000 other people could listen to it, or you go to a website with gaming news and that's a public website where tons of people go to read about that stuff. That's the kind of electronic media we want to know about in this class. But chatting one-to-one or emailing, that doesn't really count for our purpose. Is that clear, that distinction? Okay, good. So just start paying attention to what you do and give a thought as to okay, what day is the most average day that I would use media? And maybe a good thing is like a weekend day where it's usually very different than a regular day, a regular school day. So start keeping track of that, and on Tuesday we'll talk about it for real. And it's a short essay based on that stuff. Cool. So this chapter of the textbook is dedicated to just introducing the whole topic of electronic media and kind of giving a big picture of the And so they start off here saying, well, mankind communicates both verbally and with language and stuff, but also with various kind of signaling. And so it kind of goes through some of the early forms of communication, ranging from smoke, semaphores, stuff like that, pigeons. There won't be an exam question on this. So we do get more into the electronic media. That's where our interests are. So, this timeline here in your textbook, pretty interesting, picks it up sort of from the beginnings of the mass media. And by mass media, we mean, media that can be distributed out to a massive amount of people, mass media. So, a big deal there is the creation of printing press so that you could make newspapers and books. And you could make massive amounts of copies of the Bible to start with, of course, it was the Bible. But then other forms of entertainment and information getting sent out to the masses. But as we look along this chart, what do you notice about the pace of innovation that's written up here on this chart? What do you see there? Where is it all kind of clustered? What's that? Okay, you guys are looking at dates, yeah, around the 2000s or so. So it clustered, let's say there's way more innovations happening up here, right? On this side of the time scale. Pardon me?
After cell phones.
After cell phones, right. Or if we're looking in dates around 1965 or something. So, just this, I think we could learn many things from this timeline, including, what are those kinds of media that we are interested in talking about. But one thing we could just look at is, wow, the pace of innovation really picked up starting around the 1960s when television really became, the dominant mass medium, and then all of the things that we've seen developing on there. And, here we have, like 100 years with not much happening, and then another 100 years with a couple things happening, and another 100 years, and then we get to the last 50, 60 years, it's like, boom, explosions, explosions. So one thing we can learn just from a quick look at that is just, there's been a kind of like exponential growth in terms of technological innovations on this. And of course, you're coming right into, this part of it, versus I've experienced this part of it. So we've all grown up in a period of rapid technological change, but you guys are just really taking the cake on this. So, all right, so cool. We live in interesting times, but they are kind of crazy times too in terms of how much everything changes. Next week and the week after, we'll get into, the details of what some of these great innovations were and the inventors and such. But today, just, some bigger kinds of concepts or ways of thinking about what's going on, which are interesting. So, we mentioned the mass media, and here it says it's a one-to-many model. So what that means is basically, you publish a book in the 1600s, you're Johannes Gutenberg, you've created this printing press. Everyone wanted a Bible, but they used to get it with people actually hand copying out a Bible, monks in monasteries. Each book was thousands of hours of labor, of course, extremely valuable. But in this case, you can print books. And so from your printing press, your little, office in Germany, you can put out one book to many people. And then there's this other model here, which is more like the telegraph or the telephone, which is the one-to-one model, where you're one person and you're communicating off to another person. And interestingly enough, at some point they thought that radio was really just going to be a one-to-one medium. On the contrary, we think of telephony as a one-to-one medium. Some people were thinking, hey, what if we broadcast some stuff over the phone? Like, what if we, phone 100 people up and play them the same show? So they were kind of thinking that the telephone could be a one-to-many type of technology too. So one thing that's interesting in the beginnings of these technologies is that there's so much to figure out that we already know now, but at that time, they didn't. So the mass communication, as we come to know it, is the one-to-many model. And of course, that's where you can make one thing and then make a lot of money selling it many, many times. And so that's the basis of the economics of mass media, was that. So let's take a look at a couple of pictures. So there is an exam question on this. We'll review this, of course. But this is a pretty well-known model of communication, where we got a sender, and we got a receiver, and we got, a channel, and down the channel flows a message. So this could refer to, one-to-one or one-to-many communication. And in fact, Shannon and Weaver were Bell Labs engineers. They were engineers who were interested in basically figuring out how good a communication connection had to be acceptable for use. So they would look at like a telephone line and say, it's really noisy. How good does the connection have to be so that people will tolerate that noise and be able to understand each other? So this was actually an engineering type of model. And that's why they call it the mathematical model, because they actually did math to calculate what was an acceptable amount of noise, you know. But it became so popular that we use it now to talk about any kind of communication, because, you know, sender, receiver, that's, you know, that kind of goes for all communication. Like when you watch TV, what role do you play? You're the receiver, right? And who's the sender in the case of television? The broadcaster, like maybe the network or something? Yeah, absolutely. The channel would be, you know, well, we got channel 6, we got channel 3, and so on. So sometimes the channels have those names. In other communication, you know, I don't know, Facebook, for instance, is, you could view it as, you know, composed of many, many channels. So of course, cable networks have many channels. And then the messages that run through them are, of course, the content of media, which is interests a lot of us, and eventually we'll get more into it. So that's your mathematical model of communication, but it also goes for a lot of communication. So coming back to this idea of feedback, there's also a question about feedback. So feedback is a concept which says, well, this model of like CBS putting on the Big Bang Theory goes out on TV, and we watch it and we laugh and, you know, get to know people on Big Bang Theory. That's kind of the communication that runs in this direction. But there's also, you know, Big Bang Theory is eventually going to go off the air. I think this is its last season or something. Maybe people are upset about that, or they want to express themselves about. Maybe the receivers want to communicate back to the senders. So we also should think always about communication that happens in the reverse direction. And that's called feedback in this model. Okay, so it's the ability of the receiver to feed back to the sender. So in typical mass media, it's the dominant flow of communications from the sender to the receiver. But there's always possibilities for feedback. So if we looked at, for instance, books and newspapers, if you try to think back to a day where those were, you know, really our only media, how would people feed back using those in those media? Let's say, Miko?
They're probably going to write a letter to the publisher.
Yeah, they're kind of, that's their way, would be to write a letter to a publisher. That's true, yeah. And now looking at, you know, media on the web or something like that, has that improved, that ability to feedback? You're nodding. Do you want to say more?
Like, I think with social media, like, you know, like people tweeting about a show or something, so I think that gives feedback to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if everybody heard that, but, and I should shut the door because the recording's better. Yeah, the comment was, you know, with, for instance, social media, with people tweeting as they watch the show, you know, even the mass media, even old legacy mass media like television, has now, you know, so much more feedback. Like basically, so many more channels of feedback. You know, you can monitor tweets. You can, you know, and they do this. I mean, they basically hire media and analysis firms and public relations firms that comb through all the social media and try to, you know, evaluate what people are saying about this stuff. And on a more human level, you know, the writers or the showrunners of these shows are paying attention to, you know, what's in their Twitter stream and stuff. And they're, you know, I think part of being in any media industry now, at the same time as you're doing your creative role, you're also involved in the huge conversation going around it, the flood of feedback, you know. So things have changed, and this is a basic way of understanding it, but it does let us know that, wow, so much more possibility of feedback now that we've got all of these channels. So down here, this line I think is important. It says the internet, the paradigm breaker, right? And what they're referring to is, largely what we were talking about here, that in the old media, in radio or in television, it was dominant one-way flow. And now it's really more of a two-way flow of information that is happening. And so more models here, more pictures of what we've been trying to express. But this picture corresponds to what we were talking about here, where the mathematical model said there's a sender and a receiver, but if we look at the possibility of feedback, it's more of a kind of a loop like that, right? And then a more sophisticated model, these are all pictures which are just trying to approximate what's going on. But this model tries to account for more for what goes on in the receiver's end. So let me offer you two possibilities, or like two things that could happen tonight if you're still watching TV, and I'd love to know about that. Your media diary. So let's say you go watch a TV show tonight. This model says that you'll watch the TV show and you'll enjoy it, you'll understand it or whatever, but all that happens kind of in isolation. And maybe you will want to, tweet about it or something like that. But doesn't that kind of reduce what's going on? Let's say what happens if you're watching it with your family or with your roommates or something, and you wind up discussing what's going on in the episode. Or the next day you hit school and you're still thinking about that show and you talk to, while you're waiting for class to start. So this is a little too reductive of what goes on for the receiver. This type of model here is, well, these are all receivers, and some of them just watch the show and that's all that happens, but some of them start talking to each other about it. And so there's a whole lot of talk and interpretation and communication going on here. So this picture tries to account for that, And so that early model of sender to receiver, we got to think, well, all the receivers are talking to each other. And they may once in a while, send a letter to the editor or, tweet at the network or something. But there's also constantly people talking about it as they consume and stuff. So that's a model. And then here's the one-to-many idea, or one source for many consumers. So CBS sending out to everybody watching on TV. Now here's the internet model, the paradigm breaker, says the textbook, which is where you no longer really have a strong center, which is like a hub that distributes the same thing out to everybody. Now you got a bunch of centers of content that are providing content to each other. And you could also imagine this as sort of a kind of a push model where the sender pushes all the messages to the receiver. But now you got kind of a push and a pull where, let's say this person puts out a message and it may reach somebody, maybe push to some people, but some others may actually go and pull that message because they want that message and they click somewhere to get it. Can you guys think of any examples that might, in the real world that might express this idea that we all become kind of providers of content, that some receive and others pull ideas?
What do you mean by pull?
By pull means that you voluntarily have to do something to go and get the information versus the radio or TV model, which is just turn on your TV, but otherwise it just is pushed at you. Michaela? No? Okay. Someone take a stab at it. Come on. Yeah.
Social media, Facebook?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Could you elaborate, or does anyone else want?
Like through the way that you post content onto your page for your audience to view it and then interact with it through message and comments, and then your audience is also able to pull that content by sharing it through the share button on their own pages. Absolutely,
yeah, great. So, each of those platforms offers you slightly different ways of doing this, but yes, if I'm William's friend on Facebook and something goes into his feed, it should show up in my feed, right? If he shares it, At the same time, I might also, if William's involved in a nonprofit or something that publishes a page of all their activities, I may actually go to that page and pull content, actively go search out, his latest video on this, social catastrophe or something which he's trying to cover and talk about as an active online person, So, and there are other, many other kind of social media platforms which mimic this. Can anyone think about how YouTube would exemplify this?
Movie trailers?
Yeah?
Like YouTube, you can also say there's a video that you see. You can also share that with other people with social media, or you can send it through text with other people as well.
Got you, right. So there's many ways of if not pushing your content, of pushing a notification which says, hey, there's content here. All of us can participate as content creators, which, this is not news to anybody, of course, but if you compare it to the old mass media model where you had to get a job and work for years before you became, well enough placed in the television industry to have a voice in that industry, you can tomorrow have a voice on YouTube, and it's still video. You just will not have the scope of any television network, but it's scalable. One day you can hope to have millions of viewers, millions of followers. Are there other video platforms where that type of thing is happening, this kind of scalar explosion of audience and interest? Pardon me? Livestream? Is that a platform? I don't even know. I'm kind of clueless. Is Livestream a platform? YouTube live streaming? Yeah. Well, that's a real interesting thing. We can get to that when we talk about synchrony and asynchrony. But that's absolutely true. That the big trend of online video is to be able to now for individuals to be able to live stream that stuff. But how about Twitch? Is anyone involved in watching Twitch? People know what it is, right? Yeah. Yeah. Some folks do. Yeah.
Watch him on Twitch.
You watch him on Twitch? Oh no, he's been outed. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Could you tell us about it, or try to kind of connect this sort of thing to Twitch?
You share the live stream through anything, basically. You can forward it and stuff, and people get more viewers watching.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the platform allows as many people who want to become viewers can do it, right? And I think some of the most successful people on Twitch have in the millions of monthly views. That's more than CBS has viewers. You know what I mean? So if we're simply comparing people in seats, some people working on Twitch are as big as networks are in terms of their audience. They call it reach. How many people do you reach on a monthly basis? And that is pretty revolutionary and probably scary as well to CBS and advertisers looking at that. And of course, they're jumping in. Yeah.
Oh, all right. I was gonna say. So, do you think they're just gonna switch over to streaming now?
They seem to keep on spending more and more money. So maybe overall they would have spent more if Twitch didn't exist. They would have spent more on traditional TV. But CBS, as the #1 television network, continues to make more money each year, even though their audience comes down. So what they've managed to do is to kind of bid up the price of their commercial value. At the same time, all those advertisers are pumping money into online, Twitch, and everywhere else too. So it seems like the more media we have, the more the companies are spending. There are some places where you can see a decline, especially you see a decline in the number of people watching. But in terms of the ad dollars that are coming in, it seems like, for now, network TV has managed to sustain its profits. Very impressive, really, because there's lots less people watching. So good point. So I think we can see how this model, as it's much more complicated than this one, and this one still applies to some old school broadcasting outlets, but more and more, when you're online, and that's why they say it's a paradigm breaker. Paradigm is a word that refers to like, kind of huge changes in our expectations about things. The earth is flat, and then there's a paradigm change. The earth is round, gosh. And then we believe that until a bunch of people start saying, no, the earth is flat again on social media. And then there's like rage, oh gosh, how can you think that stuff? But the paradigm refers to, these huge assumptions about like, was the earth flat? Is the earth round? And this was the paradigm of old media, and this is the new media paradigm where, it's a complex interrelationship and it's a hugely interesting universe that you guys live in now. All of this. Let me just back up. I think I might have jumped over a couple of slides there. It's hard to back this up a little bit. While I'm messing around with my slides, is anyone having any thoughts that they want to share following on to this conversation? Okay. Huh. I don't think I missed anything. Another thing we'll talk about in class a little bit. If it's good stuff, share it with us, please. But no, that's serious. I'm sure you guys are talking about content, but I just want people to talk amongst themselves as much as we can. It's terrible to broadcast from up front in a class. I prefer the interrelated thing if we can, but there's, obviously slides up here that I'm talking about. So one thing that we will talk about throughout the class as well is the role of government in regulating communication, and that's been with us. Again, we'll talk about this when we talk about next week about the start of mass media and radio and stuff, and of course it's still going on now in terms of what kind of limits should we put on communication. We have an honorable tradition here in the country of the government staying out of people's speech without what we hope is a well thought out and publicly supported agreement about it. But this new domain of this new model of communication of many to many, and it has changed a lot in terms of government regulation and the conversation about freedom of speech. Where have you run up against this in the last year, few months, et cetera? Where have you heard people talking about, what can be said online, what people are communicating? Is anyone sensitive to that debate? Heard anything about it? Yeah? Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Well, the main debate is pretty much that, I'll use Twitter as my main example, that, Twitter is a private company. They can do what they want. They're not under any, government regulations. However, if they're the main place of discourse, do they have a right to uphold the same levels of the government for free speech?
Yeah, the right and the responsibility, I guess, too. Yeah, very well said, right? And this is I guess all of this is provoked by what kinds of public events, basically?
Mainly, oftentimes it's from people complaining that, and this happens on YouTube as well, where things like, it seems like things like trans speakers and other people like that tend to get more strictly looked at than people on the right, people who actively advocate as a Nazi and things like that.
Got you. Absolutely, yeah. So a lot of this is coming around controversies about hate speech or deliberately misleading communication, which is proved to be immensely influential with certain parts of the audience. Have other people run into this type of thing? InfoWars, for instance, being banned in the last couple of weeks from YouTube. Is it YouTube and Facebook, or YouTube and Twitter?
It was.
Thank you.
It was YouTube, Apple, Facebook, everything except Twitter.
Everything except Twitter.
And then the head of Twitter came out and said, we didn't ban him because he hadn't broken our policies, and then a bunch of people flooded him with a bunch of examples of how he broke their policies. And then he said something else, and then he got a 1-week suspension. Yeah.
Thank you for knowing all of this better than me and for sharing with us. That's the importance of having everybody here and talking about it. But definitely, so these issues are front and center, and they are a nightmare for the new dominant media, the media platforms like Apple, Twitter, and Facebook, Instagram, etc. They find themselves all of a sudden, grappling with these questions that were very well settled in old media, but are now new and pressing questions, in our current environment. And so we'll learn more about maybe not the cases, but the structures for regulating communication in this country. But I think it's important. And let me just look here. All of this, the rest of the slide is, again, I just think, something we can think through and talk more about later is just the basic notion of how, in our political system, the media actually play a really crucial role, with the idea that if your population is going to be involved in decision making, the population has to be, well informed. And the population has to have the ability to communicate effectively as a body, that exists outside of government control. As the whole idea is that in order for us as citizens to participate, we got to have good information, and we've got to be able to talk amongst ourselves about it and decide what do we think, what are the good things to do. So. When that is publicly subverted, it starts to raise a lot of questions, and rightly so. So we can look more on that. When we first get to regulation anyway, we'll see that it was largely a business matter. That in order to get the electronic media up and off the ground, you had to create a situation where someone could, open up a radio station and not have somebody else steal their frequency and drown them out a week later. There is a question on this. So traditionally, when we study the electronic media, we've just talked a lot about, basically kind of diagrams of how communication happens and how electronic media, changes the big pictures of how we talk to one another. There's also, a tradition of research about audiences themselves and about us as viewing beings or listening beings and stuff. And so one of the ways of just, thinking that through is thinking about what kinds of effects do media have on us. And they've broken those down to cognitive, emotional, and behavioral effects. And so just to briefly define these, but of course they're much better defined in the textbook. But a cognitive effect would be if media gets you thinking about something, if media gets you to learn something, which media messages are often designed to inform us. Emotional effects kind of stands to reason. Then it's things that stir us emotionally, and so typically, if the news often leads to more cognitive effects, although if you get really pissed off at what you're seeing on the news, it's an emotional effect. And people tend to think of entertainment media as largely being devoted to emotional effects, to make us excited, to make us, sad, all the many ways. But, we also learn stuff from entertainment media too. And we should keep a close eye on entertainment because it often creates assumptions about people, groups of people, about types of behavior and stuff that appear to be just there to entertain us, but start to enter into our perception of what's normal, what's natural, what's inevitable. It's always those type of people who are the crooks on TV and stuff like that. So even though entertainment has those emotional effects, it's also getting into our cognition about what's going on. And then behavioral effects, which is, not that much discussed, but people do research, for instance, like what happens to your heart rate when certain things are shown to you and so on. And of course, advertisers would love to think that media has the behavioral effect of making you buy this thing the next time or want this thing, oh, I'm thirsty when I see that. Has anyone had that experience of seeing an ad, for instance, and having some kind of behavioral outcome associated with it? Have you ever felt compelled to do something that you saw in an ad?
Not unless it's like advertising a sale and then I'll go shop.
Okay, and that might be midway between a behavioral effect and a cognitive effect. You learned that there's a sale and it's a good deal, but also maybe some kind of, acquisitive instinct was scratched there. It's like, oh, I would love to have that thing, So, yeah, where very often if you could look at this as everything having all three of these types of effects coming into play, but maybe more dominant one or the other. But has anyone just seen and gotten thirsty or gotten hungry watching something on TV, or just run out like grab something? Yes. Thank you for that. Yes. Do you remember what the product was?
I think it was like Round Table.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good. So there are some behavioral effects, and yet when people say, dang, he used to watch a lot of violent video games, I guess that explains why he, went out and hurt those people. That's also, an assumption of a behavioral effect, and as we saw, we have to really think of those critically as well. So as much as advertisers would like to see like a behavioral effect coming out of what they show, when we actually research it, it's harder to demonstrate that. Yeah. Influences on how we live our lives. So this stuff kind of trickles through. One thing I noticed this summer, I don't know if you guys were watching the World Cup stuff. I don't have a clip actually from the World Cup where I actually saw this, but oh my God. I suppose this is like the oldest meme in the world to you folks or something. You've seen it. Anyhow, here we go. I'm watching this. The guy scores a beautiful goal. And then, what was he going to do, his dance? I was watching it, one of the final games or whatever. We're just going to see some good soccer here. Eventually he's going to do his dance. All right, here it is. Ah, there we go. Oh, we're not getting a full shot. We can't see the leg work. That wasn't a very good clip. Well, there we go. I guess that's more. Doing that funny little Fortnite dance. So how many of you folks, oh, there he is. No, okay. I got to set these up better. But how many people recognize that dance? Or, yep, some folks nodding and such. And
Oh, I think he owns it.
do you own that dance? He's just going to stay home and live stream this class if you keep on putting him on this. Are you his moderator or something?
No,
Yeah.
I'm his,
#1 fan.
Number one fan, all right. Do you have a moderator to deal with chat in your, or do you deal with it yourself?
Not really.
You don't really? Okay. I mean, because chat, by the way, as I mentioned it, I said I promised I would, like, where is my chat tab here? Nobody's streaming today, unfortunately. I don't even see my chat tab. What on earth has happened here? Am I missing this? Well, anyhow, chat is a great example of, feedback coming in as you're actually doing this. But I find it also a cognitive challenge to try to manage all those things at once. I'm pretty impressed to see, people blasting away in the middle of a video game and also chatting about some kind of discussion and also like getting tips and stuff. It's pretty amazing. Anyhow, so here we go. Influencing our lives. Okay, so let's just follow through that example and see what you think about it. So here's a French soccer star or a bunch of sports athletes and stuff. I saw people dabbing too or whatever, last year's craze. So you're watching mass media, right? I'm watching a game. I was actually watching it through Hulu because yeah, whatever. I subscribe to get the whole World Cup, and so okay. But let's say there's a mass medium. You are watching that, so there's a typical old kind of model. But all of this has influences on our lives, right? So a very popular game makes everybody aware of a bunch of kind of physical movements, and all of a sudden the athlete who's out there he's communicating to us, right? With his body. He's doing that little dance. It's, and it's kind of like to express his joy at scoring a goal. But it's also maybe got, what would you make of that message of an athlete doing something like that? What's he saying?
He's saying that you just took a loss.
He just took a loss?
Yeah.
What does that mean? I thought he just scored a goal.
Lost.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that they lost. That
the
the opposing team. Got it. Nico, was that?
That he probably plays Fortnite, and he wants to reach out to the folks who plays it as well. That he's sending that message.
Those are two great interpretations, right? First of all, I wasn't even, I like the way you phrase it after I understood it. And that's kind of like a direct communication that he's sending out here. Whoa, I'm winning, you're losing. And then what Miko's saying is like also kind of like if we were marketers or we were branding, we were saying, how does like a bunch of, sports has a really wide appeal, but sports doesn't appeal so much to a very young audience. So maybe someone like these athletes or like Griezmann, he's kind of saying, I'm part of you kids who are all into this or stuff. There's something new, young, alternative about that type of thing, and incredibly popular, right? I mean, this is a game that millions and millions of people will recognize and know. In fact, to me it was news, but that's an indication of how out of touch I really am and how much I count on you guys to be more tied into all of this, yeah. So that's interesting. Clearly, there's that influence on how we live our lives. That knowledge of what that dance is, what it means, permeates out into the culture, and individuals pick it up and perform it and start communicating with it. And I'm watching that in an old school kind of mass media setup. But if we had to model out all of what's going on there, we would sort of see multiple iterations of someone puts out a game with these silly dances in the game. It becomes super popular with a mass audience, which means it spreads into the culture. And even people who don't play the game, like my kids started flossing a while back. I didn't even realize that was one of the Fortnite games. And I don't think there were dances, and neither did he, and maybe you're going to tell me that, hey, it didn't originate there. People were flossing or something else well before or something like that. I don't know. So it gets out in the culture, and then it feeds back in again to this performance by athletes and stuff. So it's like these loops of feedback and communication happening and kind of communicating on top of other communications. So it's like in the game, it means, yeah, I beat you, you lost. But then it also means, hey, we're young, we're hip, we're cool. We're not some old school soccer team. Yeah.
So is Fortnite more that diagram or the other diagram with like the?
I think you have to, if you're going to look at some complex real thing in the world, it's like a bunch of diagrams together. And so these diagrams, nobody sits in their office at CBS and says, this is what we want, this is what we are. This is the type of thing that we sit in class and say, well, we've got this incredibly complex reality. Let's take this, pattern and lay it on top and see how much sort of looks like this pattern. But then, then we could say, let's take this pattern and say, okay, there was Fortnite and there was a bunch of Fortnite players, but after that, everybody got really into Fortnite and they started doing it on the playground or talking about it. And so that's where it starts getting into the culture, in that model. And then you could see it as coming back to this, when I pick it up, totally out of the loop, totally part of a different culture. And then I get curious, like, what is that? Why is he doing that? What does that mean? And then thanks to YouTube and everything else, within a couple minutes, I can find that out. And I never could have before. So it's a pretty interesting situation where all of these things change, I guess. I hope you know. Goodness me. So that was an interesting kind of little event that I picked up. Okay. This is what Chow was talking about a little earlier. She made me think of this anyway. Asynchronous versus synchronous. Probably I shouldn't do that. Sorry, Jody, making a mess of that part of the board. But another way of, we've been thinking about media characteristics of different media. We talked about audience, so one-to-one, one-to-many. That was an important concept that we can think about stuff with. This one, asynchronous versus synchronous. So what this draws as a distinction is synchronous media is media that's consumed almost the minute that it's distributed. So like a live football game or something, or an Oscars presentation, or a class like this that on good days that we live stream it, right? So almost the minute that it happens in here, it's consumed by those who are streaming it. So that's synchronous. So like when things are synchronized, they're happening at the same time, right? So remember that. Asynchronous is when there's a gap, when there's lag, and so at that point, when you consume the lecture through archives, it's asynchronous. It happens a little bit later on. Or it might happen months later on. Or what we're seeing in television as, we're seeing companies like Netflix, which are pouring billions of dollars into producing shows that they know not their entire audience has even enough time to watch this stuff. But what they're building up is a huge library for the next 10, 20 years or whatever, so that, they finance it now, but they know that they'll own it and that they can keep on getting subscribers in year after year after year. So that asynchronous aspect, which again, if you look at the old television medium, you had new shows and you had reruns, right? And eventually things would just go away. But now we're in a situation, Netflix or Hulu or all these huge streaming services with these big libraries where things will never go away. They will always kind of be around. Now, that's in a kind of ideal world. In the real world, they're not always going to be, there are movies I want to see that are not on any platform and so on and so forth. But, looking forward to just endless storage and access and everything, you could see that asynchronous media is growing, and yet synchronous media is a big deal now. As Chow was talking about live streaming, the latest present that Facebook and YouTube are giving us in the last few years is we can become a live broadcaster, just like CBS, NBC, ABC used to be. What do you guys consume in a live stream usually? I mean, I don't want you to embarrass the Twitch contingent over here again, obviously. Obviously, that's a really huge thing, is tuning into personalities on Twitch and watching them do, game playing or creativity and stuff. What else do you live stream?
Concerts or music events.
Yeah.
Award shows.
Those work, yeah. Sporting events, I guess. And
Conferences.
conferences too, yeah. Okay. How about, does anyone sort of follow anybody who kind of lives their life online, like 24 hours a day? See some dog? Politics, okay, yeah. And you were nodding about following people.
Yeah, well, there's this app called Meet Me, and a lot of people do the live broadcast. And there's this one guy that I follow all the time because he kind of dabbles in different types of drugs, and he just kind of shows us the effect of them.
Oh my God.
And yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Okay. I don't want to shut down any conversation by being judgmental, but I also don't want to stand up here and say it's a good thing to do that. So I've done my duty, but now could you tell us, or do other folks follow this person? Are you aware of it, or what do you think about that whole aspect of it?
It's just interesting to me because it's like, I'm not putting any judgment on it, but at what point can you get in trouble for it, or can like the government get involved if you're publicly displaying, doing something that's illegal? I just find that interesting.
Yeah. Does he sort of, is he careful, or he or she careful about?
I don't think so. We're kind of, I think everyone talks on there because a lot of people comment on there too. They're like, aren't you afraid of getting banned and all this stuff?
I think that would be some kind of user agreement. You would have to.
Well, I don't know, if you're breaking the law on camera, I think that would be pretty good evidence against you. Yeah. So
You
that.
say one bad thing on Twitter and you're done. Why can't they censor you?
You mean in terms of people piling on socially, or
Just like in general, like you have to agree to those terms and service.
like the president saying, "I fired Jim Comey because of the Russia thing," and then
Yeah.
it's like, "Oh, you shouldn't have said that, dude."
Yeah,
I
it
guess.
is.
Yeah, your speech remains your speech. Yeah, but I also heard about a person on Twitch who was basically kind of said, "Well, if you guys don't give me money to get a hotel room tonight, I'm going to be sleeping on the street," and getting a pretty large following. Does this ring a bell with anyone? Again, I should set this up a little better. And then they kind of chose a girlfriend for him or something, or they said, you should go talk to her, and they actually did wind up being boyfriend and girlfriend. And no, this is not ringing a bell. No, okay. I'll have to find out the name of this particular Twitch character. But it seems to me to be a kind of a novel way of creating programming. It's like basically your life or the things that you do become interesting enough so that people are going to follow you. And Twitch has that really rudimentary mechanism of paying a performer for by tips or however other things, and he probably has sponsorships now, Ramada Inn or La Quinta. Whenever he gets $100, he'll stay here, right? I don't know, but yeah, it's an interesting situation. Kinds of questions that we could pose about that. Anyhow, again, that's just something to keep our eye on, and also, there will be just a question about that to make sure we understand what is synchronous, what is asynchronous, and when we're talking about some of the attractions of Twitch, for instance, is you really are experiencing something in real time with whoever is on the channel, and maybe for the moment you're only chatting with them, but we could foresee even more of a kind of a relationship developing through the media in that way. So synchronous is big, live streaming is big, and in a way synchronous is as television is less and less watched, the kinds of shows that are on old school TV that still really sustain their audience is synchronous stuff like live sports, award shows, finales of reality shows, where it really matters that you get the news at exactly the same time, because the next day you'll hear that the Warriors won, and you don't really care to watch a game where you know the outcome. So synchronous is still pretty important to old school broadcasting. What else have we got? Interactivity, of course, that's what the internet can bring us. There's a lot of ways that interactivity is, really enacted, whether it's can we just chat through a Twitch channel, or can we, interactivity, the novelty of being able to, hey, turn left, do this, do that, ask her for a date, I'll give you $5 or something. There's an additional interactivity there. And of course the interactivity of being able to put up a video and respond to other videos and stuff. So there's a lot that we'll talk about specifically about interactivity, but it also seems to be, whereas it was enough in old media just to get people sitting and watching your show, now we want to see interactivity, Nielsen, you've all heard their Nielsen ratings, right? So Nielsen does the television ratings. They count the number of people watching shows, and that's really important for television. They also count the number of tweets that are going out about shows now. So So they try to gauge interactive engagement as well. So that's a big thing that is becoming more and more valuable in old media. So they're working together. Distance storage, so much here that we have to talk about, I guess. We talked about the internet as being a kind of a paradigm changer. So we go from the one-to-many of mass media to the many-to-many push and pull that we see on the internet. And a lot of this is thanks to digitization. And you remember when we started this, we saw that timeline where things from 1965 really start picking up, and by 1980, it's just like every couple of years there's an innovation or something. And in large part, that speed has been thanks to digitization. When you can take any kind of information, break it down into bits, and then send that through a digital pipe to a consumer, now on their phone, you open the way to just providing a whole bunch of new services that nobody could really imagine before digitization. And media kind of blurs and converges. Like I did a research project about digital radio before it became a reality. And what they were talking about, they were excited because you can send coupons through digital radio. And then they were saying, and we're thinking of starting a service where we send children's video programming to cars through their radio. So then you've got radio, which is in fact behaving just like TV. You used to have a separate box to do these. You bought a radio, you bought a TV. The TV would not really play music for you. So now the one box will do it all, right? Thanks to digitization. So your phone can carry conversations, it can carry video, it can carry music, it can do it all thanks to digitization. So the huge innovation has been digitization. No internet without digitization, right? The internet takes pictures, text, music, just breaks it down into little packets of digital information, sends it out through a computer network all over the world. 1 second of your program may go through Lithuania, another second may go through Miami. Who knows? It all gets reunited at your computer and played back as video, as audio, as text, thanks to digitization. It's so efficient, it's changed everything. So, we'll observe that change impacting everything. And of course now, it's created this fluidity, which is, I no longer know if I've got students who want to learn how to do radio or TV. People want to do media. So, there you go. There we go. Oh my God. Yes, so what I just mentioned, like everything coming to be distributed to you through your phone, for instance, is a great example of convergence. And the blurring of boundaries of platforms. Facebook starts off as a way for people to share photos and little memories and stuff. Now it's, creating its own original video content competing with TV. That's what we mean by blurring of boundaries. It's like, well, it's social media, now it's video, and it'll be who knows what. So this convergence of everything coming into a single technological output is kind of mirrored in the business, and we'll be talking about business, but these huge companies like AT&T, making moves to acquire television libraries because, it's like a telephone company that then got into providing, cable television that now gets into streaming. And, so there's a convergence there. They're buying up huge companies and combining them into, giant companies. Apple is starting a television production wing, it's been going on for a year or two. We have yet to see shows really come out of it, but everyone is bracing themselves for, how do we compete with Apple? How do we compete with Netflix? These are gigantic, companies, and so a lot of media companies are grouping together to get that scale and compete. Deconvergence, Time Warner splits up. Time Magazine, worthless. Let's get rid of it. You know, the Warner Holdings, HBO, cable holdings, still worth a lot of money. Let's deconverge that business because the print stuff is dead, you know. So you'll see that, people throwing away newspapers, magazines, like these incredible brands from 100 years, gone. Consolidation, we find fewer and fewer owners of more and more media. And there's a lot of disquiet about that. So we can see what you think about that. Concentration of media ownership. You know, if Rupert Murdoch could own everything, if everybody was Fox News, the Republicans would be super happy. Right? So there you go. And oh my God, how should we wrap this up? Because here we go. Let's wrap this up instead with a bunch of questions that we could ask instead of a bunch of information that I shoot at you. So, and we'll talk about this on Tuesday, hopefully when the stream is up and when everyone who can't attend today is with us as well. So this is the basis of our media use analysis that I'm saying. Part of your homework is, you know, read chapter 2 for next class, or as much of it as you can, and you can read the rest of it for the Thursday class next week. But also start thinking about your media uses and habits. So, you know, how much time are you spending with media? Now that you're in college, have things changed? You probably have less time to spend with media than you did over the summer. So think about that. How familiar are you with pop culture icons, your information about celebrities and stuff? So that's the kind of cultural spread of all this information. What social benefit do you get from electronic media? Like if you don't know the latest stuff, do you feel out of touch? When you do know the latest stuff, can you talk to people about it? And so on and so forth. So here's some good questions here that maybe we could start off next class looking at those and then and talk about that assignment that we're going to do. And if you have a chance, look the assignment over and start thinking about how much time you spend with media, which media are they? If I asked you to give one up, what would be the hardest one to give up? Okay, we'll pick that up next week. Thank you. And anyone who came in late, just let me make sure I get you on roll. And especially if this is your first time attending the class for some reason,